So now prepare to be informed and enlightened during our Fireside Chat, a panel discussion featuring some of the most influential minds in education and technology. We're proud to welcome Jean-Claude Brizard, CEO of Digital Promise, Alex Kotran, CEO of aiEDU, and Dr. Mary Jo Madda, Senior Program Manager for Google, as our distinguished panelists. Emma Gallegos, an esteemed Equity in Education reporter at EdSource, will moderate the discussion, guiding us through an insightful conversation about the future of AI in K-12 education and its broader impact on society. Take it away, Emma.
All right. Good morning, everyone. I'm excited to be your moderator for this excellent panel where we will explore the overarching narrative of how artificial intelligence is reshaping the educational landscape and its implications for school leaders, educators, and students. Our experts will delve into the transformative potential of AI in enhancing learning experiences and outcomes, the challenges and opportunities it presents, and the ethical considerations that come with its integration. Full disclosure, in the spirit of this conference, we had ChatGPT craft this introduction and brainstorm some questions. I think it performed admirably, but I'm not worried about it coming from my job yet. Now let's get started. Okay, ChatGPT made a splash when it arrived on the scene. Many schools and teachers responded with blanket bans, treating it like the equivalent of the academic equivalent of steroids. Now, most guidance that I've seen recommends against bans, so my question to you is how blanket bans may affect marginalized students.
I'm happy to start. Hi, everybody. I'm Dr. Mary Jo Madda. It's still very weird to say that because I just got my doctorate last June. So, congrats. Imposter syndrome is real. Also, please continue to keep going to your primary care physician. In my experience, the work that I do at Google, I sit on a team for, it's called Education for Social Impact, and I'm one of the program managers for an after-school computer science program for Black, Latino, Hispanic, and Indigenous high school students. We're actually going to be opening up an Inglewood-based lab, so if anybody's interested, let me know. But one of the things that in all of the research that I've learned is, oh, now we're in the dark. Whoa! All right, this took on a very different kind of vibe. Is that when you look at the impact of tool-wide bans on certain populations of students, it tends to affect students in low-income versus high-income situations. I myself had a very direct experience with this. UCLA sent out an email to every single student and said, please do not use generative AI tools. It is the equivalent of getting help from another person and cheating. And in my mind I thought, but if students are unable to go to the tutoring center on the UCLA campus because it closes at 5 p.m. every night because they have to work a second job or go home to take care of their families, I mean, what are they supposed to do? In my opinion, I think one of the biggest issues is that according to a study from the US Department of, I think it was Human and Health Services, 57% of low-income households have internet, and the average megabytes per second are 25, whereas with high income, it's about 85%, and it's an average of 100 megabytes per second. So if you have school-wide bans on AI, what ends up happening is the kids that have access to good internet and tools at home are just going to have better access to those tools in general, whereas the students that don't have Wi-Fi and device access at home are not. So the question is, do we want to continue to be a part of the exacerbation, or do we want to try to address it in a healthy, responsible, and community-driven way?
So I get this question a lot, and I think when people ask me this question, they're expecting me to say, oh yeah, you know, we absolutely need to lift these bans, it's all about AI in schools, and I often have to remind people that, so I'm the CEO of the AI Education Project, and we're a nonprofit focused on bringing AI literacy to K-12 and really empowering students and teachers with all the knowledge and skills that they need to thrive in a world with AI. But that doesn't mean that we're the AI implementation project. And we actually don't go to schools and advocate for using AI tools. That's not really the first conversation that we start with. So I actually think in many cases, if not most cases, school-wide bans on ChatGPT is the right move. If I was a superintendent, I would ban ChatGPT because it's very reasonable to pump the brakes while you evaluate and try to better understand what are the safeguards that we have to have in place, what is the sort of baseline knowledge. I mean, when we talk about AI literacy, a big part of that is how do you use AI tools, not just effectively, but safely and responsibly. And it's not something that's as simple as, you know, a widget that you sort of install and then suddenly ChatGPT is safe. This is a learned behavior that really has to be taught to teachers and to students. And so a school-wide ban in principle makes sense if the ban is part of a process of figuring out how do we actually do this in the right way. But we also know that if you graduate high school today, 2 years from now, certainly 3 or 4 years from now, so if you're a freshman in high school today, if you graduate high school and you don't know how to use these tools, you know, the analogy is like the computer is like a bicycle for the mind, as Steve Jobs said. You know, LLMs, AI, it's like a sports car, a supercar. You will lose the race if you're trying to compete for jobs and you don't understand how to use AI. And so the question for schools is they have to teach students how to use these tools, and we can't expect or rely on them to build those skills at home. And so there needs to be some plan about how do we get to a place where there's like trusted tools that we feel comfortable putting in front of students, because that's the one place where we can really ensure that all students are building those skills equitably and responsibly. So,
yeah, and I'll take a slightly perhaps different tack to the conversation. So I too can understand the knee-jerk reaction to banning, and we all know the challenges around equity. My 11-year-old was using GPT when he came out. I know there was an age requirement. His entire class was using it. He goes to a school in Silicon Valley, so this is the other kids. And I actually called a couple of my colleagues in districts who actually were banning this stuff, saying, what the hell are you doing? But for me, what it really indicated was the fact that our pedagogy was so backwards and had not evolved to a point where technology was a tool to be used in the classroom. I don't know how many of you guys are old enough to remember when the graphing calculator was seen as a cheating tool. I was teaching physics in New York City. The New York State Board of Regents banned the graphing calculator on any assessments. Short few years later, I became head of high schools in New York, and I remember the day I got an email from our chief of staff who said, how quickly can you spend $50 million? And I was buying TI-83s because it became a requirement on the test. And one thing changed on the assessment: show your work. That was it. So you think about pedagogy, you think about assessment, et cetera. If we really have evolved to a place where the technology is integrated into what we do every single day, it becomes a tool. There's no need to ban it. But if we are so sort of entrenched in the old ways of assessing kids and teaching, of course it's a cheating tool. And we can give tons of examples, hopefully hear some today, about how AI, LLMs, et cetera, can be used as an enhancer. As my colleagues here from Digital Promise will tell you, how we augment the intelligence of the relationship between kids, students, and content.
Yeah, you guys are teeing up my next question beautifully, because you know, we are in kind of this experimental phase in schools with artificial intelligence, not just schools, I think everything. But so I've seen some experts worry that a sort of two-tier system might arise in the way that AI is deployed in schools, with better funded schools with more time, resources, staff, and technology, are able to, you know, change the pedagogy, as you said, and come up with creative AI-proof lessons that help students develop critical thinking, you know, and creativity. And so here's a question from ChatGPT. How can we ensure AI technologies in education promote equity and accessibility rather than exacerbating existing disparities?
Somebody else want to start?
I'm happy to start. So let me first of all say that digital equity is a foundation to this conversation. Our chief is actually here in the audience. When you think about access to powerful technologies, not weak technologies, powerful devices, access to broadband, we as a country still struggle to close that gap. The pandemic should have taught us that ubiquitous access to technology is a critical foundation for the work. The second thing I'll say is that, in our paraphrase, Richard Elmore, the late Richard Elmore at Harvard, often said that the most important relationship in education is between teachers, students, and content. We know really it's teachers, students, families, and content, right? How technology or AI is augmenting the intelligence of that relationship, frankly, is the work. If we get that construct done really well and understand what it means for neurodiverse kids, what it means for black and brown kids, what it means for poor kids in Appalachia, in parts of New Mexico, that the teaching and learning construct remains that. What we know about what we do in teaching and learning is still paramount. How you think about education technology and its integration into that milieu is the work that we need to do. And the equity discussion does not change. It remains, it morphs, it evolves, but the foundational aspect of what we do in schools, frankly, is the work that we need to keep doing.
Yeah, it is a certainty, right, that if your school doesn't have access to AI tools, let's fast forward 3 or 4 years from now, you are going to be at a disadvantage, but it is not so simple as, well, every school needs to have access to these tools and then we've solved the equity challenge. It's really, the analogy that I use is, you can imagine the pitch when the self-checkout machine companies were trying to sell to Safeway and all these companies, and it probably was something like, imagine these self-checkout machines, it's going to free up your employees to go out and interact with customers and recommend different recipes, and then fast forward to today, and you're standing there with your hand up, and this poor lady is kind of trying to rush around and sort of help deal with people's all the glitches that are happening, and it's because just because a tool can be used to increase productivity or augment people, it depends on how you deploy the tool. And so the equity conversation also needs to be really grounded in how do we use and implement AI in a way that empowers teachers to do more of the work, of their best work as educators, which is that sort of like interactive classroom, hands-on learning experiences where they're actually helping to build skills and support students' learning. And I think, if you disintermediate those two things, my worry is that we get too focused on the widgets and we forget about the critical role that teachers are going to have in really helping the most marginalized kids.
100%. I like the fact on the last question that John brought it down to sort of a practical situation, so I'm going to do that for this question. I taught in the 3rd Ward in Houston, Texas. I was a middle school math and science teacher, and when I was teaching science there, this was back during the days, kind of the early days of one-to-one iPad technology, where that was all anybody could talk about. No one was really talking about it in my district because we were more focused on just making sure that we could get the kids to pass the Stargate test. Then I moved back to Los Angeles, where I grew up, and I started working at a Catholic school. And the Catholic school was losing kids to the charters, and the parents were coming in being like, we see these schools with one-to-one iPads. We need to get those in stat, or we're going to look like we are falling behind. And the reason that I bring that up is because I think it's easy for our minds to automatically go to like bilateral situations where you either have it or you don't. But in both of those situations, there were complexities that needed to be dealt with. The conversation needed to happen in some capacity in Houston, but in Los Angeles at this tuition-based middle-class income school that I was teaching at, there was almost like a rush to do it because of the keeping up with the Joneses thing. And frankly, I think that this question comes up every time there's some sort of new tech, new software, new widget that comes into the lexicon that everybody starts to think about. So I would answer this probably like I answered questions on panels 5 years ago, 6 years ago, 7 years ago, which is every situation is unique and complex, and you have to bring in all members of the community, teachers, parents, administrators, and students, especially the students, to figure out the best ways to integrate the new tech moving forward, whether AI or anything else.
Yeah, great, thanks. Now I want to turn to talking about disabled students. A survey from the Center for Democracy and Technology found that students with disabilities were more likely to use AI, but also more likely to face discipline for using it. So I'm wondering if you have advice about how educators can thread this needle of using this powerful technology to help a group of students who arguably might benefit from it more than anyone.
I mean, we really need to get away from penalizing students for using AI. I mean, it's like, it's almost unfathomable today that you would penalize a student for like using Google to help with their homework. I think that ultimately, in the same way that, and especially because a lot of the conversations that are going to be happening today are all about how do we help teachers use AI tools, and the dissonance of really thinking about, okay, well, how do we help teachers use tools, and then in the same breath talking about how do we prevent students from using those tools it's not very logical, and students see through that, and so I think so the primary focus here is obviously like we need to get away from penalization. It's also the case that for the accessibility community, large language models are probably going to be, it's the group that will be among the most transformed in terms of their experience in school, because the applications, when you think about, whether it's language or whether it's personalization of learning, there's significant ground that we can cover. So, I would say this is maybe one of the maybe top priorities for schools is like, how do we figure out how to implement that well? But yeah, don't punish kids. That's crazy.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the opportunities for students with disabilities to use technology to further their education, I mean, isn't our job as educators to provide them with every opportunity to be able to learn as much as they can? I mean, the penalization thing makes me really nervous. I will say that about Oregon, that is a coalition of diverse learners, and he was working with Student Voice at the time, which is a nonprofit, to basically elevate the voices of students with disabilities in the ed tech conversation because he felt like it wasn't happening. So this kind of echoes the answer that I had to the last question, but I think bringing students with disabilities into the conversation as well to understand what their needs are and also to co-create good use case policies is a win-win, because you automatically get the support of the family and the student, and then also the educator who's implementing it when they co-create these use case policies together. And that's something that I think is honestly advice for just AI implementation in general, but especially where I do fear that students with disabilities are some of the most under-asked and under-consulted users that we have out there in K-12 education right now.
Let me attack this maybe two different ways. One is whenever I see adults punishing kids for being creative or using tools, it means the adult's afraid of the tool, right? So let's be clear about that. But when you think about neurodiverse kids or kids with special needs, AI has great potential, frankly, to support those young people. At Digital Promise, we have a structure called the Learner Variability Navigator. It is a learning science tool translated to actionable tools for educators, and now being integrated into Schoology, Panorama, et cetera. The team now is looking at ways of transforming the IEP from a deficit-based construct to a strength-based document, leaning on learning science. So you think about how AI can actually enhance that. That is part of the work they're looking to do together, thanks to the Oak Foundation, and maybe IES may be helping us with that as well too. We have an application in them. You think about really shifting the conversation to making that, again, really individualized, right? That could apply for all kids, not just kids who have special needs. Because if you listen to Todd Rose, he talks about every single person has a jagged learner profile. No two people are the same. Yet we, in education, treat everybody as if there's an average person. The 3-hour test, et cetera, is about the average kid or the average person, no such thing. So AI, I think, has the potential there to really help us get to what we've been espousing for decades, right? Personalized instruction, but leaning on that kind of technology to support, again, leaning on learning science to support the individual child. That is in action, and we're trying to develop tools for that right now, Digital Promise.
I'm so glad that you brought up Todd Rose. Has anybody read The End of Average by Todd Rose? It's a great book, isn't it? Todd Rose is a professor at the Harvard Graduate School.
He left.
Oh, he left?
Yes. Yeah, he's a nonprofit.
That's okay.
Now.
He needs to spread his wings. But his book, The End of Average, is a great read, and I think actually very pertinent to this conversation. So if you're looking for a new, book for your book club, sorry to everybody else in the book club, but suggest that one.
Yeah, he has several, but that is the best book
That's my
I've
favorite.
seen.
Yeah.
It's called The End of Average. but really get you to understand this idea of the jagged learner profile of each person, and how in every industry we've built stuff around the average person. Education is the most notorious for the average person. But AI, I think, has the potential, your technology has the potential here to really help us to get to the individual needs of individual children. If you have a second, again, it's a free tool on our website called Learner Variability Navigator, LVN or LVP. Take a look at it. You can look at third grade literacy to all the way up to high school, and math, etc. It really helps you understand. And the technology, AI, is only going to put that on steroids.
All right, let's turn to algorithms. Okay, so generative AI output is only as good as its input. And we've seen as technology gets rolled out, not just with artificial intelligence, it has these biases, the same biases that humans do. So racism, sexism, homophobia, ableism, or it could just flat out be inappropriate. So what can educators do to ensure that they're bringing tools into the classroom that are both appropriate and inclusive?
So I'm going to start with this, but I'm kind of curious for your take on this as well. So it concerns me that many times when we talk about algorithmic bias, the conversation goes something like, well, we need to just solve algorithmic bias. And then once we solve that, then we can use these tools.
Good. Yeah.
And I would posit to you that we will probably never fully solve algorithmic bias.
Yeah.
At least in the next 5 to 10 years. Yeah. And by the time we've solved it, we've probably unlocked a level of AI that is going to change society in ways that we can't even imagine anyways. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's less about how do we fix that problem, more about how do we build the competencies and knowledge to use the tools with the understanding that you're always going to have to be cognizant of, you know, where might that bias play and what are sort of the mitigations, or in some cases, the considerations about maybe we shouldn't be using AI tools for certain things. Like, for example, you shouldn't automate all of your grading, at least today, using ChatGPT, because companies, and the thing is, you know, and I'm sorry, I'm going to put Google on the spot, but this is even in the news, the fiasco around Gemini. First of all, that's not unique to Google. Every language model out there has versions of this weirdness that comes about depending on how you prompt the question. You can bet that OpenAI and Google are working extremely hard to try to figure this stuff out. And the fact that they haven't yet, I think, is a demonstration of the fact that we're probably not going to get there soon. So what is the solution? You just have to figure out, okay, well, what are the applications that make sense, and how do you build sort of those, that awareness that we're going to have as teachers, in the same way that we have conversations about you know, bias and equity in other contexts.
Let me add a layer to Alex's answer, and I completely agree. One of the things that the team, Digital Department, is espousing to push all of the time, and you may have seen it in the guidance coming out of US DOE, around putting the human in the center. So machines making decisions, making sure that human beings understand what is being made, when AI is being used, and they use their judgment understanding, especially around these kinds of issues, to help to make the decision, right? If you leave it to the machine to make a decision, then yes, it is baked in, you're not going to remove it. Let me give you a concrete example as to when we did not do that with tragic consequences. More machine learning than AI, but when you think about the 737 MAX 8, so I'm a pilot, so I talk a lot about aviation, so forgive me. If you see what happened with the MAX 8, there were decisions being made by the machine without the pilots being in the middle. They had no idea what the hell was going on. And by the time they try to figure out, crash. That has been solved, of course, right? You cannot remove the person, the human being, in their judgment in what is being made, or things being made by machines. That's one of the ways of mitigating some of this stuff, right? If you yourself as a teacher or as an education leader understand the potential biases that are baked into these products, then you can say, it doesn't make any sense to me, I'm going to come back and do it differently. The second thing I'll say is that, and I've been pushing this a lot in the last number of weeks, AI is an ed tech conversation in education. Mm-hmm. You're not going to be buying AI, you're buying ed tech products that have AI inside of it, or will have AI inside of it. The question for you as leaders in education is, do you have an ed tech strategy for your district? By the way, most districts don't. The CTO, the Chief Technology Officer, and the Chief Academic Officer don't talk to each other. We're watching this in products being purchased by the CTO that is not part of the instructional program. Or technology being introduced into your schools by students, by teachers, without you even knowing what's coming into your schools, right? So having that kind of edtech strategy to understand, by the way, we're spending billions in edtech in this country. And if you talk to any one of the VCs, Owl Ventures, or anyone else, they'll tell you AI will be in every product, edtech product. And by the way, most of us don't have an edtech strategy that is baked into our instructional strategy in schools. That is the way to begin to really manage this kind of discussion, frankly, in our school systems.
Okay. I'm trying to think about the order in which I want to answer this. I'm going to give you a small anecdote, and then I'm going to directly respond to what Alex said. A friend of mine was a teacher in New York public school system, actually, and he taught in a school that had a lot of West African students. There was an edtech tool that he loved using. I won't name it here. Many of you are probably familiar with it, but it's not really the point of the story. The point of the story is that in order to participate in the activity on the tool, students had to input their names. And when his group of students input their names, the tool recognized their names as slurs or inappropriate language. And he sent a note to the creators of the tool and said, hey, what's going on here? And what he realized was the tool was created in Northern Europe by a company that was largely made up of white male engineers. And I think the example that really embodies is that when, like you said, algorithmic bias is never going to go away, because as humans creating the tools, we are inherently biased. That's just the human experience. But by giving the company that feedback, they were then able to make those edits, right? And so in the case of Gemini and some of the work or some of the issues that have come up more recently, that's exactly what we need to do. And I think teachers need to work with students to get them comfortable to give that feedback and become a part of the creation process, honestly. The other thing that I would say, and this is very near and dear to my heart because of the work that I do with Code Next, the program that I run at Google, if you have a group of, I'll just say myself, girls who grew up in the San Fernando Valley, who are big fans of Ryan Gosling and Chadwick Boseman, RIP, creating tools, it's going to be a very different type of tool from other demographic of groups, right? And so when we think of who is creating these tools, I think it's our responsibility as educators to also provide as many opportunities for students to develop the skills they need if they want to then be the people that are creating and designing those algorithms. Yeah, feel free to clap at that. Go for it. Sure. Yes. I mean, honestly, I think that there's a lot of missed opportunity right now for, honestly, us as a state to bring more computer science education into the classroom. AI and computer science are concentric circles. They're not one and the same, but they're connected. But I do think that, in my opinion, it would be, if we could reach a place similar to what Chicago Public Schools has reached, where every high school graduate has to have at least some computer science requirement in order to graduate from the public school system, that would be amazing. Now, my colleagues will usually remind me, like, listen, and it is hard. It's because it takes resources and it takes professional development, a lot of the things you were talking about, funding. But to me, that is a big step that we still just really haven't been able to figure out, and that is something I'd like us to be able to do. And don't get me wrong, Google is just as responsible for that as y'all. We are in this together, so let's make it happen if we can.
Can I make one modification to the suggestion
Yes,
around computer science? It is something we push quite hard on, and Google has been helping us with this as well on computational thinking. So think about that structure versus computer science, right? So computational thinking involves skills like debugging, algorithmic thinking, pattern recognition, and my favorite district, and there's a couple, but my favorite district that I was visiting last year with a whole bunch of folks is in Alabama, Talladega County, Alabama. They've now taken computational thinking and integrated across the entire district in every core. So picture this, kindergarten class, building birdhouses, talking about computational thinking. Cross down, high school honors English class doing Shakespeare, talking about computational thinking. Those skills, those competencies are integrated in the entire core content, and every child experiences that. So they learn how to manage machines versus the other way around. So that, for me, is the solution, because computer science courses are great, but too often it's only selected kids get it, whereas CT pathways every student in every class from pre-K to 12th grade really part of the conversation.
That's great. What's the name of that district?
Talladega County. And you guys were there after we visited. Jenny was telling me that they got there for 2 days a week. You stayed in Talladega County. The other one is Fayette, I think in Pennsylvania, I think is the state.
Great. Well, and so biased algorithms are just one of many things that educators need to think about when they start bringing this technology into classrooms. We're still in a very experimental phase. I think that's why a lot of you guys are here trying to figure out how to navigate this. There's a lot of companies pouring a lot of money into AI, making a lot of really lofty promises about solving long-standing equity issues in education. So educators have a lot on their plate post-pandemic. And so I'm wondering what advice you have to educators trying to navigate this slightly chaotic landscape, I would say.
Okay. First of all, I think there's a moment of recognition, which is there's still a lot of fear around AI, but if you are a living, breathing human with a smartphone, you are already using AI every day. Raise your hand if you used Google search within the last 48 hours. Congratulations, you are an AI user. Nice work. I think that there's that kind of, sometimes we forget that AI is actually integrated into a lot of the technologies that we're already using. So when you get past that, then I really like to tell educators, you don't necessarily focus on using AI in the classroom quite yet. Take it into a low stakes environment like your life outside of the classroom to get comfortable with it. One thing that I love telling people is, if you're not a huge fan of cooking like I am, but you need recipes, I love going into Gemini and saying, I have these things in my refrigerator, give me a couple of options for recipes I can make. Super easy, and it gets you kind of into the vein of thinking about it as just a tool that you use not necessarily to do the whole thing for you, but to replace a task or to help you think about new ideas. So that's my recommendation, is really to start integrating it into lower stakes environments before you really kind of go full throttle with it in the classroom. I also highly recommend, Google has a ton of trainings on this. Got to shout out the Google for Education team. We also, Applied Digital Skills has a couple of very straightforward and easy to follow lessons as well. Again, take it out of the classroom first so you get comfortable with it and then bring it back in.
Yeah, I think we're preaching to the converted. You guys are here.
I mean, this is, yeah.
The fact is that you are here because you want to be part of the conversation. So that's my first advice. Be crew, not passengers in this effort. Don't sit back and wait for things to happen to you. Lead and push the conversation. Second, I would say is play. Play with the stuff as much as you can. I met the teacher of the year from Kentucky a few weeks ago, and he talked about how he was using this stuff in his classrooms. He was having a blast. Not necessarily being supported by the district, but he was doing this kind of stuff. Give you an example of what one of our colleagues, one of our convenings talked about in using ChatGPT, for example. Because you can ask the LLM to have kids write a 5-paragraph essay, and the kids go put it on ChatGPT, and they get the essay, and they're cheated, right? Or you can have the child, for example, have ChatGPT write an essay, taking a position on a particular topic, ask the machine to take a counter position on the same topic. You're teaching prompt engineering, right? Then ask the child to work with a partner and develop a presentation juxtaposition of the two opinions from each. Now you're leveraging the technology in what you do in your classroom. So think about, frankly, ways of really moving your pedagogy, where you're assessing kids, where the machines can help. And the last thing I'll say is, again, this stuff is going to show up in your tech products. I was on a call this morning with the CEO of BrainPop, and now they're moving earnestly in thinking about how AI is going to be showing up and what they actually do, how it's going to show up in CNI. That's the way in which it's going to show up in your classrooms, right? So pay a lot of attention to your EdTech product integration. I keep pushing this conversation, especially for the system leaders in this room, because too often I'm saying, again, we don't have an EdTech integration strategy. This is how AI is going to show up. So watch what is happening. If you are a teacher in this room, push it to the school leader, the principal. Hey, I'm seeing this, can we use this? We test this idea. But right now, frankly, it's a sandbox of play. And be careful how you play, of course, because the data you're putting in becomes public.
Yeah, it's important to note that, like, large language models are not, they're not an invention per se, it's more of a discovery. And the cutting edge of large language model research is, in many cases, people just goofing around with the models and trying to figure out what happens when they put this prompt in versus this prompt. And so the key to using LLMs is domain expertise plus experimentation. And like, that's it, right? So domain expertise plus experimentation. There's no book of prompts that you need to memorize. The only thing you actually should remember is ask the LLM, Gemini or ChatGPT, whatever your request is, ask it to think step by step. So that actually does, research has shown that it actually does increase the quality of the outputs. It also helps to be polite, oddly, to be polite to the model. I'm serious. But some other quick advice for teachers: take-home essays are done. We need to get over it. Like, if you are assigning take-home essays, like, you should just expect that your kids are cheating. And frankly, I think it's on you.
My entire dissertation, I used Gemini.
It's on you. If your kids are using it, I would say, like, I wouldn't blame the kids for that. I think the teachers need to, I like debates, because if you think about pitting students against, one another with different sides, now they're both using, let's say, ChatGPT. Now it's not a matter of whether they're using it, but rather how are they using it to enhance their position, right? So there's, like, I think, tweaks like that. And if you don't know where to start, you can just literally ask. You can say, hey, I'm trying to write a lesson plan. I'm not really sure how I'm supposed to use Gemini. Like, can you give me some ideas about how you can help me write this lesson plan? And it will actually give you like 3 to 5 great ideas. And so that's a good place to start.
Yeah, there's a question coming up, I believe, where we talk about how we think that teachers can, I think, save themselves time. And I cannot wait for that question.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's just jump right to
Great.
it.
Just quickly before we go to that question, just going back to this idea of having lesson plans being built. I saw a tool a few months ago, and we asked it to create a lesson that was project-based and for dyslexic kids. The project-based structure was actually quite ingenious. The dyslexia and the leaning on learning science was pretty awful. And unless you have some understanding that what is being spat out is excuse my language, crap, you're going to use it. But again, that human in the center, understanding what's coming back to you and using your judgment of what you know about your class and what you teach is paramount. Because again, the machine is learning. It may not be pulling from a strong database. But there are folks working hard to change that, including Google. But just understand that sometimes what you're getting may not be, quality stuff.
Okay. Well, I am excited to jump onto this question about how this is going to lighten the load and make your lives easier. And I just want to add, my mom's a retired district administrator, and so she's at home. She has a lot of time to experiment with whatever. She loves using generative AI to write thank you notes, do all this stuff. And so she's in touch with her principals, and she's like, she was a former principal. She said, you guys need to get on this. This is going to make your life so easy. Think about, you don't have to sit there, pore over an email, or because that's a lot of what principals do. So she's like, this is just going to it's like an assistant for you. So I mean, that's just a personal anecdote, but yeah, so we've been talking about the student learning experience. I'd like to hear how you think that this is going to help teachers who need, and educators. Yeah.
All I can say is that when I was teaching, on Sundays, I would go to Corner Bakery at 9 a.m. and sit there until 5 p.m. creating my lessons every single Sunday for the entire week. Because I also worked at a KIPP school, and KIPP back in those days was a 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. schedule, and we had Saturday school from, I know, from 10 to 2. And so if I had generative AI tools back then, I would have used them to reduce the amount of time it took me to create slides and curriculum. More recently, I've been using them for tasks that are somewhat repetitive in nature, namely writing letters of recommendation for my Code Next seniors when they're applying to college. But I do think that curriculum development is a huge one, and then grading. Thank you for that comment about take-home essays, by the way. The Google for Education team, there's something that we now provide called practice sets, which are basically AI-laced grading tools. And grading is something that I also used to spend hours and hours and hours on. And having the tools that exist today would have just saved me a lot of time. So I would say grading, curriculum development, and letters of recommendation.
Can I just say that the teaching profession, if you're a school leader, the job is unsustainable. If you think about my old days as a teacher in New York City, 5 classrooms, 34 kids a class, and doing, especially with your seniors and they come to you for recommendations, I mean, it's impossible. So there's quite 3 or 4 groups right now in the US rethinking the mental model for teaching. The idea that even if you have one class, like you can solve the needs, the jagged learner profile of every kid in 150 kids in your caseload is impossible. So all that, beyond the fact, thinking about, for example, a bunch of things, teams of educators, including parents, supporting the needs of children, right? And how that kind of structure in a school, leveraging technology as an enabler as well, can become, even parents being part of that team, is the way in which some of us are beginning to rethink the way teaching ought to be done. Again, teachers in the center. The idea is that AI can replace teachers is absolute nonsense, right? There are folks, again, who are thinking about that too. Hopefully they'll never succeed. But you think about this idea of really rethinking the mental model, yes, from pedagogy to assessment to curriculum to paperwork, all that can be changed. I know a team in Melbourne working on reducing a teacher's administrative caseload or burden by 25% using AI. So the folks who are actively working on tools and solutions to make the job more sustainable and doable. And we all know here that we are losing and not gaining teachers at all. We have a crisis, not just in the US, frankly, right? That the job has to be made much more sustainable. So lots of opportunities here to make that happen. One last thing very quickly. When I was teaching physics, less AI, more technology, I shifted my laboratory. If you remember your high school labs, your science labs, the cookbook lab, right? You follow procedures. At the end of the done, you have no idea what the hell you did, right? That was science, the way science is taught in many, many places. Leveraging technology, we made the experimentation to be about 1 to 2 minutes. The discussion, the analysis was 45 minutes. Think about that kind of shift in paradigm. This is the potential for technology and AI, and really making this much more about case conferencing, discussions, and less about the procedural stuff that we need to do in our classrooms.
Yeah, and it's less about it's less of this like plug and play productivity hack that, like, you know, if you think of like the full workflow over the course of a day of an educator, you're not looking for like this huge chunk of time. You're actually looking for these sort of like slivers of work. And so part of this experimentation is, it is the correct realization if you're like, this is actually not that great. I could have done a better job with this. Like oftentimes when people start using Gemini, they'll kind of have that reaction where it's like, it's actually not that great. And that's correct. But I'm going to use, so Ray, an educator at Anaheim Union, I was talking to him last night, and he was telling me about one of the ways that he has been using ChatGPT. And it was for grading, but this was like a really good application of the use of LLMs for grading. And it was not to actually provide students with a grade, but rather to provide the initial feedback that he would have otherwise had to write down and read every essay or every assignment. Yep. So what he does now, with the time that he used to use sitting down and writing that feedback, he gets ChatGPT to provide the feedback. He gives it to the students, and he says, it might be wrong. This might be trash. I don't know. But I want it to be a starting point for a conversation. And then he uses the time that he would have spent providing the written feedback to actually meet with students one-on-one. And like that is the magic of how this can really augment and empower teachers. Is it's not about creating a huge amount of like body of work, but rather unlocking time that can now be more interactive and personalized. And you know, I don't think that model can necessarily be copied and pasted into every single class, but you know, if you invest, you know, a reasonable amount of time over the next couple of months, you will find the versions of that for yourself, and your kids are really going to feel it and see it.
Mm-hmm. I would like to turn to talking about guidance from the government. So we've seen some guidance. The Biden admin released the blueprint for an AI Bill of Rights. Handful of states, including California, have released some guidance as well. But I'm curious what you would like to see from the government, what kind of role it should play, and also, you know, what kind of role we should demand that it plays. You know, what would be the, you know, what kind of guidance, what kind of regulation, funding, and what's the risk of weak regulation too? I kind of want to understand the stakes here.
Happy to jump on this one quickly.
Okay, please.
And I'm going to call out a few of my folks who are in the audience. I feel the U.S. government is doing quite a bit, to be frank. And Pati, Jeremy, and Judy are here. I've been working with the U.S. DOE, Office of Ed Tech, in producing a lot of guidance for the field on AI in education. So these documents are available on their website or our website. Please feel free. If you're a system leader here, I'm going to push, please lead. There's a document Jeremy just produced, because one of my biggest pain points and heartache was that states in the U.S. were not leading. Districts were thinking about this, teachers were thinking about this, school principals, the feds, but not the states. Jeremy just produced a document that looks at 6 states who actually are providing guidance and beginning to talk quite a bit about this. The document is available on our website. It's digitalprofits.org/states.ai. So it's starting to happen here. I know ministries around the world who frankly are thinking about this as well. But no one's arrived, no one knows the answer, but the DOE in the US has been doing quite a bit in producing guidance. The states need to step up a bit more.
Yeah, I mean, funding. I mean, a lot of times we've looked at the ethical principles that either school districts or organizations have published, and they almost invariably they include accessibility and equity. And I think what's missed in that discussion is if your principle for implementing AI is equity and accessibility, what you are also saying in the same breath is we are going to pay millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars a year to cover the token costs of these LLMs. That price might come down at some point. But if we really care about this being something that every student has access to, we can't just expect schools to come up with those line items out of thin air. It's going to require serious dollars, and I can't imagine how that's going to happen without a very concerted effort from the federal government and state governments to ensure that districts have that bandwidth to do it.
Yeah, in the same vein of making it rain, I would say there's a real opportunity for the government to invest in research and funding for research. In fact, I brought with me, this was a piece of research that 6 of Google's top VPs, senior vice presidents, put out about a month ago. It's called AI and the Opportunity for Shared Prosperity, Lessons from the History of Technology and the Economy. And it includes the perspectives of our chief legal officer, chief finance officer, chief research officer. And one thing I found really interesting in this is there's a section where they talk about pieces of technology that probably we don't really know about because they sort of fell to the wayside because they didn't get enough research and development to really see them through. As an example, if I say Concorde, other than the bird, does anybody know what the Concorde is? A couple. Okay, so the Concorde was a supersonic plane that was originally intended to change air travel as we know it. Due to, really largely from the government, it can be applicable to so many different industries, not just at medicine, sociology, to see the funding that was being taken away from NASA to go towards space travel.
And I'm actually going to.
Yes, please.
We're starting to. I could listen to you guys for another hour. We need to wrap up, but so I just want to go ahead and thank you guys for all your insights. Round of applause for this panel. They did really great. Okay.